Just when you thought the Fed had broken all of its taboos all over the last 5 years, two regional Fed presidents yesterday seemed to smash a couple more. From Minneapolis, Fed President Coach Lakota and Boston Fed President Rosengren gave speeches yesterday. And Agnes, you think they've gone a little bit deeper here on these?
Yeah, and again, it's one of these things. It's almost like diplomacy, right? There's certain things that you usually leave unsaid. And one of them that Rosengren brought up was kind of the debasement of the dollar, which is such a hot button issue. And essentially was saying that this new policy that they have will, among other things, change the demand for U.S. dollar-based assets and lead to a lower dollar, which would help exports.
Now, this is something that's generally in the purview of the Treasury. It's not kind of something that the Fed wades into.
It's one of these things that everybody knows, but the Fed has been very, very, careful to kind of sidestep.
Well, and the Fed is, we don't know what they really think, but even Rosengren is not saying this was why we did this. He's saying we did this, and this is a consequence of it.
Right.
But it's not that the Fed is trying to create a weak dollar.
But even saying that it is going to help their goal, which is to stimulate the economy. I mean, and one of the reasons this matters is not only is it a hot button here, because there's a lot of sensitivity about how the Fed policy is going to hurt the dollar, but also abroad, where everybody else is trying to stimulate their currencies as well. So when you have a Fed official kind of coming out and saying this,
so it feeds into the currency wars that we've heard so much about.
And the other issue is the Fed president from Minneapolis talking about inflation, and everyone's still trying to figure out like this 2% target. Should there be a little bit of fudge area there? He's saying yes. And again, it's not a whole lot.
He made it pretty clear. He made it clear.
He said a quarter point above or below the 2%. And again, I think that's all reasonable, but again, it feeds into this whole idea that one of the Fed's objectives is to push inflation higher. So if you can kind of go to 2.25%, it's a little bit higher. Maybe the flexibility.
Right. So this goes to credibility, right?
Right.
And it sort of makes you think about this dual mandate the Fed has, which other central banks don't necessarily have, right? I mean, there is no 2% inflation target, except that's the number Bernanke has been talking about lately.
Right.
So now there's been recently this implicit 2% inflation.
Well, there's also a big question about unemployment, because Rosengren yesterday talked about 5 to 6%.
Right, exactly. The other half of the mandate is unemployment. So if inflation is below 2 or 2.25, if you're the latest idea, and unemployment seems too high at 8%, then what are you going to do? You're going to, if you've got to balance the two objectives, logically you're going to say, well, we can tolerate slightly more inflation to bring the unemployment, if we think it's going to bring the unemployment rate down. So, but it all makes, ultimately it's easy to worry that it might turn into a lack of credibility for the Fed on inflation, and that would be generally viewed as a bad thing.
And again, this is another part of the shifting sands, right? When we first talked about QE2, it was deflation, which was the issue that they were fighting, and that was why we wanted to do this extraordinary policy. Now, everything is kind of shifting, and now we're talking like, well, now it's employment, and it's okay if inflation goes a little bit higher. So it's just like, again, it's one of these dicey areas that the more the Fed starts talking about this and is feeling its way through policy and kind of breaking some of these taboos, it's going to make it harder for them to kind of soft pedal some of the stuff, like with the audience abroad, but also domestically when you have so many lawmakers that are gunning for the Fed.
Okay. We will leave it there, and we will be back next week with more Breaking Views.